Hello, and thank you for joining us for another Tuesday afternoon program here with the Genealogy Center. We're glad that you're here, and we're looking forward to today's program, which will discuss HistoryForge, which is a project of the History Center in Tompkins County, New York. So Eve Snyder is our speaker, and she's the project director for the center's open source community digital history project, HistoryForge. And during her graduate studies, she developed a passion for the digital humanities as a tool for increasing public engagement in history. So with that, I'll hand it over to her and we can go ahead and get started.
Thank you for this opportunity. It is an honor to be here today giving this presentation for the Genealogy Center of the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I grew up in New York State, but my mom's family is from Fort Wayne and the Allen County area going back to the 1830s. And I once had the pleasure of doing some research on my family's history at the Genealogy Center. I'm going to date myself in the late 90s while visiting my cousins. As Kate said, my name is Eve Snyder, and I'm joining you today from the History Center in Tompkins County in Ithaca, New York, to talk about an open source platform we've been developing here called HistoryForge. So many of you have examined the pages of historic censuses like this one to find your ancestors. This sheet is from the 1920 census for Fort Wayne and includes my grandfather, Jack Cutter, and his parents and brother. Perhaps you have even looked at map sheets like this one from the 1919 Sanborn Atlas to see the buildings and neighborhoods in which your ancestors lived. So this is part of that sheet from the 1919 Sanborn Atlas. It has the house that my grandfather grew up in on Thompson Street. As you peruse these resources, you might have even thought about the wealth of information they contain about the communities as a whole at that point in history. I know I do. So for example, when I look at this map sheet, I wonder about the neighborhood. A lot of the housing sections, like those down here, are labeled in ways that suggest that they were relatively new in 1919, like Thompson's subdivision and Morris's first edition. According to city directories, my great-grandparents had just moved to the house the year before. After living in a different house in each of the previous 5 years since marrying and moving to Fort Wayne, they bought this house, which they owned with a mortgage, according to the 1920 census. Viewing this map also made me wonder things like if this house was closer to my great-grandfather's job at General Electric, and where did their son, my grandfather, go to school? These questions led me to think about their neighbors. Were they also new to the area? Were they, like my great-grandparents, the children of Indiana farmers who moved to Fort Wayne, looking to make a life for themselves and their children in the city? You might also have wondered what these resources had to say about the larger social and economic context in which your ancestors lived. Well, both types of resources are available for communities across the country, often digitized and online, like here on the screen. The average member of the public and even many scholars would be hard-pressed to retrieve that kind of information from the census and Sanborn maps in their current formats, as multiple sheets on platforms with limited search capacity beyond name and location. Going back to that 1920 census sheet, I can see that most of the adults on it were, like my great-grandparents, listed as homeowners, and that many were born in Indiana, with one or both parents born in Indiana as well. I can see what kinds of occupations they had and their family sizes, but I can't tell how the 50 people on this sheet fit in with those on the other 52 sheets in this enumeration district, not to mention the neighboring enumeration districts in this ward, or the rest of Fort Wayne, with a population of 86,000, or over 86,000 in 1920. The Sanborn map similarly contains so much data. How can I possibly contextualize all of it? Now, what if there was a way to more easily access and interact with that wealth of historic demographic data? HistoryForge is that tool. Data. I know, as a historian who enjoys narratives, I had a tough time embracing that word initially. I hope that some of you are familiar with Dan Buch's Democracies data, either through his recent presentation for the Genealogy Center, which is available on their YouTube channel, or the book itself. And if not, I highly recommend this book. Buch does an amazing job not only explaining how to read the data, but why it is important to do so. There are stories in these data sets, census records. The census is a starting point, a gateway drug, some of us might say. So how do we get the data? Volunteers. Community members help build their platforms by constructing historic map layers, transcribing historic census records, and adding photographs and other sources. In so doing, they engage with local historic documents and resources to learn more about their local history. Historic maps, like the Sanborn atlases, are turned into map layers. Volunteers do this by aligning points on the historic map sheets to their actual location on a current digital map and piecing the map sheets together. This is a fun way to learn about the historic built environment and which streets changed names over time. The handwritten census manuscripts are turned into searchable census databases. Volunteer this information into data entry pages on our platform like this one. Sometimes the handwriting can make figuring out a person's name, address, or occupation a bit of a mystery. But that's the fun part, isn't it? Transcribers use city directories and other resources to figure out the correct information whenever possible. The results are often different than the index information provided on genealogy websites. We find that the local touch and the extra effort makes a big difference. I can't stress this part enough. In transcribing these records, we not only make them searchable, but we also often make them more accurate. I was looking at a 1920 census record, this one, that had been indexed on a genealogy site as Herbert W. Lutz. His last name was actually Teeter, T-E-E-T-E-R, which you can kind of see, but without knowing that, it's hard to see it. The census sheet is a little dark, making the top of the T written script look a little like an L. Now, had their indexer had access to the Ithaca city directory and checked it using their address, like we encourage our transcribers to do, they might have realized that the last name was actually Teeter. As volunteers transcribe census records into HistoryForge, they enter each address and attach each person to a building record, connecting people and places on HistoryForge. The red dots on the map represent the building records. So building records in HistoryForge can contain several different things, really as much of this information about the building as volunteers can find and enter. So things like the building name here, as you can see, this building was called the R. Valentine House. That can be added to reflect the name of the institution it represents or the local naming practice for historic buildings. It can also include things like current and historical addresses. We needed that to account for street name and or numbering changes over the years. Things like year built or demolished, additional information about the building, and the map layers in this map right here. You can drop down the map layers. Those are the same as the map layers on our Forge page, which is the map page. But in this case, they're focused on the building itself. So the green dot would represent this building. Residents from the censuses, as you can see at the bottom of the page, and also just to point out that all blue items like the residents' names and the nearby buildings are clickable links. So if you click on a name, it will take you to that resident's census record in HistoryForge. And they can also contain photographs. This photograph is of the R. Valentine House. It's opened in the photo viewer, which you can access if you find a building with a photo and then you click on the photo, it will open it in a new page and then move your mouse around and you'll get this. It's a great feature because it allows you to see the architectural detail. Every once in a while, you'll drag it across the window and you'll see somebody peeking out at you really ghoulish like, and it's kind of cool. So built-in photo viewer, as you can tell, allows you to enlarge details from the photograph, like this image of the child. And here's the same photo without that. So historic photos enrich our understanding of how the built environment has changed over time. The property for the R. Valentine House and several others is now home to many Cornell students living in the sprawling student housing complex on the right. They, and in fact, most people who live in Ithaca right now would be hard pressed to guess that the image on the left was taken at the same location. HistoryForge transcription connects people with their community's past on a personal level, giving them a sense of place and an understanding of the significance of that place's history. Sometimes an occupation or industry that no longer exists catches a transcriber's eye, or something about an individual or family piques their curiosity, resulting in additional exploration to understand the story behind the census data. HistoryForge transcription can be done alone from home, of course, but often starts in community transcription sessions, which are used to train newcomers. These sessions are also a way to build community around local history by bringing a group of local history enthusiasts together to transcribe and appreciate local history. We have been doing this work in Ithaca since 2016, and with the help of a grant from the National Historical Records and Publications Commission of the National Archives, we initially expanded in 2021 with 3 testing partners. A more recent grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities helped us add more programming features and more testing partners. You don't have to be a testing partner, though, to start this project in your community. Once some initial data has been entered, community users can begin to use HistoryForge to explore their local history. So one of the really cool features that I find about this is that HistoryForge lets people search the census like never before. So most of you know this, but you can only access the census on genealogy websites where the search is directed to help you find a specific person, often an ancestor, based on name and location. HistoryForge's searchable database makes it possible to search on any of the fields in a given census year, fields like race, sex, place of birth, occupation, and even veteran status or whether the person had a radio when those questions were asked on the census. What does this mean for exploring your family's history? Well, if I had an ancestor from Ithaca who lived in, if I had an ancestor from Italy who lived in Ithaca in the early 20th century, I might want to know about their life in Ithaca. Was there a community of Italian immigrants there at the time? What types of jobs did they work? How did my ancestor fit into the larger context of their community? I can start to explore these questions by searching a census for all the people whose place of birth was Italy. Once I've queried the census database, I can view the results of the search a few different ways. In the database itself, on a historic map layer, or I can export the results and open them in Excel or another program for further research and analysis. For example, I might want to compare the results of a search in 2 different censuses to show how the community changed over time. HistoryForge Tompkins, our local installation, contains complete data sets for the 1880 to 1940 censuses for the city of Ithaca, and we are currently transcribing records from the 1950 census for Ithaca and adding census records for other towns in Tompkins County as well. Sometimes interesting stories appear when you explore these databases. Thinking about that Italian ancestor of mine, I filtered on place of birth Italy in the 1900 census database. This will initially display with a limited number of fields from the census, but I can expand those fields to display more by clicking on fields, or I could click View, which is next to the person's name, to see the transcribed information from their census record. I'm curious about their occupations though, so I'm gonna look over here at that column. And as I look at the occupations of the few Italian immigrants in Ithaca at the time, most you can see were working as laborers on the railroads or were self-employed as merchants. And yet, who is this fencing master? Philip Burgandy stands out, so much so that I couldn't help myself. I had to look him up. I found out from an article in the Cornell Daily Sun that he had been hired as a professor of fencing and Italian at Cornell. I can also look at the results of that search on a map to see where in Ithaca people born in Italy lived, and even compare the results of that search in different census years. So in 1900, there were only 25 people who were born in Italy. Their residences were somewhat scattered around the city at the time. But by 1930, the peak of Italian immigration to Ithaca, there were 494 people living across the city, with many clustered in this area called the North Side. Broadening the exploration to employment in Ithaca in 1900, I searched on occupation to learn more about the people who worked at some of the major industries in Ithaca at that time, in this case, like cigar making. New York was the second largest cigar manufacturing state in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. From the 1890s through 1916, Ithaca produced 1.5 million cigars per year. Searching on occupation contains cigars, you can see that we get 80 results. This number does not capture everyone who worked in the cigar making industry, merely the people with cigar in their occupation. Because this field is dependent on how the census taker recorded the occupation, it is often hard to get all people from a specific occupation or industry on the census on a single search. But once you've played around with the searches and seen the way things were entered, you can continue to expand your results. So what more can we learn about cigar making in Ithaca on HistoryForge? Of those 1.5 million cigars, around 700,000 were produced by one of Ithaca's several rival cigar magnates, Albert H. Platts, whose factory was at what is now 108 to 110 East State Street in Ithaca. And if we pull up the building record for 110 East State Street, we can choose to view the 1898 map, Sanborn map, focused on that location, and we can see this photograph as well. According to the map, there was a cigar store on the ground floor of this building and a factory on the second and third floors of both buildings. The photograph, which is from the History Center's archives, shows that Platt's cigar store was rather lavish. And I have to give a plug for the photo viewer for this particular photo as well, because if you open this photo up and then use that to see the details, you can see like the beautiful cigar box labels really well in this photo, which is very cool. And if we zoomed out on the map a little bit, we could also see the Central Labor Hall building where the Cigar Makers Union met once a month. That was just down the street. Historic maps like the 1898 Sanborn can be found on the map page, which is called the Forge. It opens to a Google Map layer, which has the functionality of Google Maps, including satellite view and street view. The latter is great for when you live in the community and you know the location generally, but want a picture of the specific building to put it into context. I should say, as long as the Google car has gone down that street, because there are many in the rural areas that I'm now realizing they did not go down those streets, but for areas that are more urban and have the Google car going down the street, it's a pretty cool function. Clicking on the map icon will enable the list of historic map layers. You can also search from the Forge by clicking on the magnifying glass. Viewing the results of a search on a historic map can illuminate previously unknown relationships, opening new lines of inquiry. For example, one time I was looking at different places of birth and I searched place of birth contains Belgium in the 1900 census. And when I mapped it, I noticed that everyone born in Belgium in 1900 lived in this specific area. Wondering why, I linked to the census records and started looking around. That is when I noticed that the majority of people who were employed worked in the glassmaking industry. Going back to the map page, I looked at the 1898 Sanborn map because that was closest to the 1900 census. And now, as you'll notice, this map didn't cover all of the area for fire insurance purposes. That area was sparsely settled at that time with houses. But seeing the industrial buildings in the upper left corner made me wonder. So here is an enlargement of the 2 glass factories that were still in operation at that time. There were previously 3. So to do a similar search in the 1910 census, you find that at that point, there's only 3 people born in Belgium, one of whom worked in glassmaking. And on the 1910 Sanborn, both of the glass factories had been replaced by other industries. Another feature of HistoryForge are person authority records like this one, which can host multiple census records related to a specific individual in the community, as well as photographs and other sources. They're similar to our building records in that way. You can't see it here, but below the census records there on the screen, if you were looking at the person records, you could see that it also links to other family members who lived in the household on each census. Person records make it possible to track that person in the community across time. While Peter Skuza's name was consistently spelled across censuses, this feature of the person record can be especially helpful to find women like Peter Skuza's daughter, Nellie Ricci, who married and took her husband's name. HistoryForge recently received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is allowing us to do even more, like create those person authority records, but also to have a mobile enhanced website, which makes it possible to look up information about interesting looking buildings as you pass by them, to learn more about the people who live there, and possibly, if you're lucky, see an old photograph of the building. So that's one of my favorite features. The development of a user-generated content portal, making it possible for the public to upload photos and other related content of their ancestors, or like if they had a photo of their grandmother sitting on her front porch and they could link it to the person in the place, then they can upload it. We will also be expanding the census options on the site to include all those between 1850 and 1950. Before we go to questions, I wanted to quickly demonstrate a search in HistoryForge. So this page here is for the HistoryForge project. From here, you can link to our Tompkins County installation or one of our current other installations. Pretty soon we will have 4 more listed across there. Okay, so we'll go to Tompkins County, and I recently asked a volunteer what she thought people should know about HistoryForge. And she mentioned the mapping, but added, what interests me is how the census can define a community, which she said, the query part after all the data is entered. That snapshot aspect, she called it. This volunteer lives in the town of Caroline, in a community in Tompkins County, and has helped transcribe the records of the 1920 and 1950 census there so far. She's interested in learning about how the population of this rural community changed over time. So if we were to pull up the 1920 census, which we can do by going to data and then choosing our 1920 census, then we're going to filter for that area, that locality, the town of Caroline. And we're going to remove, so you've probably seen on the census that some of the earlier census years, they had like around the 1900 census, they would have none written if somebody did not have an occupation. So oops, that was the wrong thing. So if we go to, and these are all the fields from this census, the 1920 census, listed basically in order. So if we go to occupation, we're actually going to remove, so it does not contain, none, just to kind of get more of a sense of the people who were employed. And you see here, we also want to add industry. Oops, wrong voice. So we go to fields to add the industry fields, which is right over here. Submit. Okay, so now we have those. If we click the header for occupation, we're going to sort it alphabetically. So, and now we can see those occupations. The reason to sort it alphabetically is just kind of put like with like, so we can kind of see more of them at the time. And if we do this, you see many occupations that are to be expected of a small rural community in upstate New York in 1920. And down at the bottom left, you'll see that there are 600 records found. And of those, if we were to look at, I'm going to search specifically for industry, contains farm, to get those in the farming industry. And now we see that 346 of those are returned. So over half worked in the farming industry. Oops, move it over so you can see it. So different occupations within the farming industry. So if we were to do the same search in 1950, go to data in 1950, and then we're going to filter for the locality first, town of Caroline. And we're going to remove those without anything listed for occupation. I'm not going to say without an occupation because this enumerator, will also add the industry field. This enumerator added some others that wouldn't technically be considered occupations, people who are in school and the like, as you'll see in a second. Oops. Silly me. Sometimes you do that. Occupation does not contain none. That's what we want. Okay, and now we have industry as well. So now we can kind of do that again, as I mentioned, people in school, and scroll down and see some of these different occupations. And so by 1950, the 792 people who were listed with something other under occupation, we can see that the types of occupations had expanded and became more technical, a function of the times, but also of how the Census Bureau asked census takers to record that information. The number of people leaving the town of Caroline every day to go to work in Ithaca at places like Cornell, the university, they'll probably say university, Ithaca Gun Works, the Chain Works, and the adding machine company had also increased. And so if we were to similarly look for those involved in the farming industry, now by the 1950 census, there's a lot more going on in the census, so there's more fields to go through. And we're going to say industry contains farm. You see that? And so now you see that there were 179 people whose industry included farm. And of those, you'll notice that some have this farmers cooperative in there as their industry, about 85 of them, in fact. And they worked for what was called the Grange League Federation Farmers Cooperative, which was founded in 1920 in Ithaca, and would later merge with others to become Agway. So in addition, then if we were to look for those who own their own farm, by going to, what is this, worker class, and then you'll see, and these are the options that are on the census. So we're going to click for own business. You'll see that now we've got about 99 records. This was down from 203 in 1920. So thank you for your time. And does anyone have any questions or if you'd like me to demonstrate anything, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you very much. We do have some questions for you. So the first one is, this person's wondering how far back in time can the information go, or does the information go?
So as of now, we have the ability to add the 1880 census would be the earliest census year that you could add information from. We are adding in the next calendar year to go back to the 1850 census. I think that's as far as we're planning on going back in censuses for now, because those are the ones that have the earlier ones have just the head of household and not all of the household members. But you can also add information into the person records. You can add information about buildings, and those are not limited to 1850. You could add maps from before that. So you could add more information that goes back a ways. And in fact, one of our new testing partners is the Schenectady County Historical Society in New York State, which is outside of Albany and home to early Dutch settlement in New York State. So they have documents about their buildings going back to the mid 1600s. So we're really excited to see what they put up once they get going.
That is exciting.
Mhm.
Let's see here. So is there a data field that allows for people to enter personal memories of a building or location?
There is not at this exact moment, but that is part of this current grant. So there will be the ability for people to add text, audio, video, and I think that's it for now. We do have currently you can add JPEGs, but those things will be happening soon, I hope,
Sounds
in
good.
the next year.
Um, and then someone else is wondering, does this work for um, agriculture areas as well, or just villages and cities?
So the town of Caroline is actually an rural area. And that is something that we're doing right now. They didn't have street addresses until after the 1950 census, but yet here is the 1950 census for the town of Caroline. These ones that you see right here happen to have street address, some of them. But what we've done is used other sources. And in some cases, they did have, let's see, there was a city directory that was put out in 1957. So we made the choice to start those areas with the 1950 census because the 1950 census was the first census where the enumerators, the census takers, were instructed to record their location in a little more detail, like as if in a way, I think the instruction was something like so that you can, so that somebody else could find where you are. So they'll include information like they started at this intersection and then went down this road. And with the help of some historic maps and other things, we are trying to put that together. And this having a city directory that came out, or I say city directory, I mean street directory, that came out not too long after for the town of Caroline, that's helpful as well. So we're trying to put this together and create some workflows so that communities that are not urban and don't necessarily have the same resources like city directories. Ithaca has city directories going back to the 1860s. But as I mentioned, all the other towns in Tompkins County do not. So we're starting more recent between the census information and local knowledge, and hoping to put addresses on those 1950 census records and then move backwards. And
Sounds good.
adding the current address to those places so that they can be mapped on Google Maps.
And we have quite a few questions about using HistoryForge, and people are asking if they wanted to get involved or get their genealogy society involved in developing this for their areas. How can they do that? How can they pursue that?
Well, they'd want to go to our website and then hit our contact form, and that goes directly to my email, and I do answer that. So I know sometimes I'm a little wary of putting my information out on a contact form thinking nobody's going to answer that, but that does come directly to me. And then I can talk to you about it. So HistoryForge is open source. It can be downloaded and installed. That being said, we fully acknowledge that it is not as simple as that. And so we are working on different ways to help people, communities, organizations and communities do that in a way that so that they can get this going, because we do want more places to take that on. That is the goal, is to do that. So and right now, the census infrastructure is there for the United States. Somebody reached out to me on the contact form a week or so ago from Canada and asking about that, and I put it out there to them that that is something I would love to talk to them about. We don't have that infrastructure built in terms of the censuses, because it's a different census, and the geography, but that is something that we would totally want to work with people with. So if there's anybody out there in Canada now, please feel free to contact as well.
Sounds good. And then someone is asking, is there a way to link or attach documents that refer to people who live at a place, for example, the article that you found on the fencing master.
So is there a way to ask to attach that article and that
Yes.
photograph? Yes,
Mhm.
there is.
Okay.
That can be attached, or rather, so the person record thing is new, and there will be a way really soon to add those photographs, I should say.
Good. How is HistoryForge handling changes in street names and house numbers over time, or is there a way to make corrections?
Oh, absolutely. So we have, there is, when we first started, we didn't have a way of doing that. So what happened was that when it went in on the census, it goes in under that, the street name that's on the census. And so it went in on that name, whether or not that was the current name or not, and the building record got created at that address. And then uh, if the street name was changed later in another census year when it went in there too, then we had two buildings. Now we have a way of including all of that in one building. So we also have a buildings database here,
Mhm.
and that is searchable as well. And so I'm going to pull up, let's see, I should have thought of a particular address on this street, but this is a street, oops, and I think the reason it's not coming up that way is because I'm doing this through the public view. So this is what you all would see as opposed to what I would see on my end with all the admin user glitches, just so that I'm aware of what's going on here and what you all see. So if we were to put this a current street name. Okay, so this is the Lincoln Street right now in Ithaca. And let's see. So if you'll notice here under the address, there's 3 different addresses. That one underwent 3 different street name changes, and relatively quickly, because Niagara here was one that I think a lot of people could not figure out what to spell, did not particularly maybe know what it meant, and so it just did not stick, but it did rate a census year. So we needed to include it in here. And also for people doing history of their house, they might want to know that. So here we have for the different census. So the as of year is just a way of saying like that as of 1924, it was then Lincoln Street. Any census record that let's say we've already done these censuses, but if somebody was to put in, let's say we missed one in 1910 when it was railroad, if we were to do that and start entering that information under railroad, it would recognize this as 210 East Lincoln, and because of that information that is there. So that is how we have done this to make sure that a unique, a single building record can make reference to and include people from the different census years that when the address was different.
Mhm.
Also, the city of Ithaca renumbered its streets as a whole in 1899. So all of the streets prior to all the houses that were here prior to 1899 had a different numbering system. And we have translated many of that as we went back to the 1880 census, and that is in here as well. So
Sounds
a way
good.
of doing that, yeah.
Thank you. Um, and someone is wondering, do you have map layers for each census enumeration year? For example, the enumeration districts changed with each census, so would there be a separate layer for each census?
That's up to you. There
Okay.
could be. I have there certainly could be. So if I were to go to the Forge page, we don't have that in here. I think we have, and so if we click, that's the map layers button. I think we actually did put it in for recently for the 1940 census, or did I take that out? I can't remember. But we don't, I think we haven't really used that. I mean, I understand why it's important. Our transcribers kind of get more interested in the people and the information on the census, so they don't actually necessarily always use that information, but it is something that it could be put up there if that was something that was really a focus for a specific installation. You can put up whatever map layer you want.
That's good. And is there a check data feature, or like to be able to check to see that
How do we
those that are
verify it?
entering the data don't have typos or misspellings and things like that, or how do you manage that?
How do we manage that? That's a good question. And it's something I take very seriously. So in our oops, I have to log in our data entry pages. We have things like, it's not a straight transcription in the same way some other projects would be. There's check boxes. So sometimes the question is a yes or no question. In those cases, you would pull up the, let me just stop my share and like log in really quickly to show y'all this. Okay. So when we go to add a new census record, so we add information here at the top. There's a lot of things that are built in to make transcription easier, but also more accurate. So a lot of the information from the top of this sheet here under census scope can get saved and then repeated in the next record. If the person was in the same family, it will save all of the information through the last name, for example. In the same dwelling, it will save everything through dwelling number. It saves the address, it saves the building record and all of that information. So that cuts down on some issues. When we go down to things like name, that gets transcribed, but things like sex, race, these are the categories that are from the census, from that census year. So this also cuts down on issues. And then we have also have pop-up help text built in so that people know like where, okay, I'm not sure where this is on the census, so let me look in here and see, or how am I supposed to answer this question? We also have a manual that has that information in more detail. But built into the transcription process is also a self-review process. So people just at the end of, after they've transcribed all 50 or however many lines, depending on their census, then they kind of go back and we have a checklist built out for them to look. We also have a reviewer, so every record that gets entered has to be reviewed. We don't review that against the census. We do that for two reasons. We don't have time. There's not enough time in the day. Also, other transcription projects do something where they kind of, when 3 people transcribe the same thing, the same way, they pull it out of the system. We don't have a way of doing that because this is, it's often smaller pieces of information that they're doing that for. So we have the transcriber review their work, a reviewer review their work, make it public. But then what happens over time, and especially since we started this project in 2016, and then we didn't have, it didn't look like this. It was a much different project. So we did have things in there that were, you know, like under slightly less scrutiny, shall we say, at the time. And people weren't necessarily reviewing their work. But now between the building records, so when you go into the building record and you can see information and a person's name and if they're there for more than one census year, similarly the person records, where you can see where they are, these kind of things. Sometimes those records actually end up calling, to my eye at least, like occasional mistakes, and then I'm able to fix them. So it's nice that it helps us further clean the data, as people would say, to be able to see them in multiple ways and in multiple settings. So I'm pretty confident that a lot of you know, of some basic mistakes get fixed, you know, over time as we see things in different ways.
That's great, thank you. And then we have some questions about, does HistoryForge cover all states? Is it just for New York? So I was wondering if you could please speak a little bit about partner organizations and how speak about how it's expanding.
Sure. So HistoryForge can cover all states, and we want to get there. Right now, we have partners in New York. We have Auburn and Elmira, New York, and pretty soon we're adding Schenectady, New York. We also have Oberlin, Ohio, and Walnut Hills, which is a neighborhood in Cincinnati, Ohio. We are also adding southeastern Louisiana and Pittsburgh. And so those partners will soon be up and running. That being said, as I mentioned, that this is open source, but also that we want to make this more feasible for more communities to do. So we want to work with people to make this, to make that possible, you know, and that it behooves us to do that. So if you are interested in doing it for a community that we don't have yet, and you please let me know. Or if you're interested in doing it for a community that we do have, that's great too. But
And then someone's asking, their ancestors were part of the Syrian community that came to Ithaca
Mhm.
in the late 1880s, early 1900s, and they're wondering how they might be able to use HistoryForge and how that could help them in researching and writing a local history of that particular immigrant community.
Sure. They could look under place of birth under certain census years. I will say that there were some, like 1910, where the way that place of birth has been entered changed over time. So I'm thinking for the 1910 census, the enumerators were told to record that as Turkey, Asia, as opposed to Turkey, Europe. So sometimes it's a matter of knowing the quirks of the census. However, I would hope that we would have their name there, so where they could look up under the census year. And to be honest with you, for people from who want to try this out for Ithaca, I can't remember. I think that we are still sort of going through our person records and just cleaning them, because this was something that we had all these census records, and then they got matched somewhat by computer and then also by us. So we're going through and fixing them and just making sure that the computerized matches were really supposed to be matched and that kind of thing. So I believe that this is still private until we've fixed that, because like I said, we can only control for so much. I mean, if you've worked with census data, you know that the actual original census data is sometimes incorrect. And we try to fix that where we can, or make notes of where it needs to be fixed. But of course, you know, every time something is done to data, there's always a possibility for error. So we're doing our best in this. So you might not be able to look up your family this way, but if you go into the different data sets and you can look on name, perhaps 1800 itself might be too early. I'm not sure in this case, but if we were to go to start new search and then filter and do place of birth, or you can do last name, try that. Also place of, oops, sorry, I meant to do place of birth, things like that, and see what works. The other thing I suggest for place of birth, because as I said, that changes over time, I highly recommend kind of going in here and if it's so similar to that where I removed, I said does not contain none for occupation. We have an added field for this person is foreign born, just to be able to sort all the people who are of foreign birth in these censuses. So now if we've removed all the American born, we have a more limited group to look at, and you can do the same line item sort and go in through here and see how people from Syria might have been entered here. I don't know if it was, as I said, or you could look under Turkey or Syria to get there, or line item sort it the other way, which would make more sense. And so here we have people born in Syria.
Thank you.
And I'd be happy if they want to reach out to me as well, and I'd be happy to talk you through some of this individually.
Sounds good. So we'll do one more question, and I just wanted to mention if anyone has questions that pop up after the program, or if we don't get to your question, please feel free to send us an email and we'll put that in the chat. It's genealogy@acpl.info. And if you'd like a copy of the chat from today's presentation, send us an email as well, and we'll be happy to send that to you. So our last question is, are there other tutorials that might be available on how to use this site? like if I think the person's wondering if there might be videos or tutorials on the website.
There are not at this point. So on how to search and things like that, I am putting together some handouts, but I didn't have them ready for today, unfortunately. So if that is something that you are interested in, you can also fill out the contact form and reach out to me that way, and just include that in the message and let me know. And I'm happy to share that with you. That will also go up on the History Center's page and on our website and other places. But in case you don't follow that because you're not from this area, you can contact me.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time, and we really enjoyed the presentation. So, and again, if anyone has any questions, our email is genealogy@acpl.info. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.